If you ever research what is a cloud and you want to know, I think some of the material that they put together is a benchmark from a marketing perspective. It's really simple, very easy to understand, and even their sales model, everything, it's really, really clear what Salesforce is, and I think that's a huge credit to their marketing team. So today he's going to talk a little bit about how does Salesforce work, but also about how you can build a business community. And they recently launched a product called Chatter, which enables that. So I think he'll touch a little bit about that as well. This session is also interactive, and if you want to ask questions in between, if he's open to that, we can do that as well.
Business is yet to recognize exactly how do they embrace it in a commercial context. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Salesforce, but I want to talk more about what our experience has been, and equally what the experience of our customers has been. And I think if we dial the clock back by about a decade, this sort of ongoing discussion around the consumerization of IT is really what gave birth to Salesforce. And if you think back to sort of 10 or 11 years ago when Salesforce was founded, there were some very interesting things that were happening on the consumer web. And if you think about the consumer web, where you've got websites like Google for search, Yahoo for content, iTunes for publishing, eBay and Amazon for commerce, and so on, they were doing some very revolutionary things 10 years ago that we now very much take for granted, but it wasn't anywhere near the experiences that employees were enjoying at work. And if you take a look at these sites, there's just some very basic elements. You don't need to download or install any software. There's only ever one version of the software. Jesse's not using Google version 3 and I'm using Google version 9. They're incredibly intuitive. You can customize them with clicks, not code. And behind these are some very sophisticated business processes. So if you think about ordering a book off Amazon.com, we now take for granted that it arrives in 8 to 10 days, but what we probably fail to acknowledge is that it's integrating with inventory management systems, FedEx, credit card payment gateways, and so on. And so a lot of what Salesforce has been focused on over the last 10 years has been addressing a pretty simple question, which is, why can't enterprise business software be more like Amazon.com? But that question changed significantly over the last 18 months. And if you take a look at the rise of things like LinkedIn with 75 million users, Twitter with 140 plus million, but in particular Facebook, which recently crossed over 500 million users, it really started to give rise to the fact that the way that we collaborate in networks or in communities in our private lives is very different but far more enjoyable than what we're able to do at work. And that may seem like something that has a little bit of time to manifest itself, but it really doesn't. And if you take a look at some of the data that's starting to come to the market, this is a report that was put out by Morgan Stanley at the end of last year. And one of the occurrences that probably escaped everybody was that there are now more people communicating and collaborating on social networking sites than there are email users worldwide. And if you combine that with the fact of just some simple statistics, 50% of the world's population is now aged under 30, and 96% of those working in a corporate environment within that age group have already assigned themselves to one or more social networking sites. And so there's a significant challenge, I think, for businesses with how do you take receipt of a new generation of people that have grown up in an environment where you're communicating in a very different way to the antiquated systems of email and so on. And some of you may have caught the interesting article that was in the Economic Times earlier this week around how particularly the large services companies are now very much wrestling with this issue. The other thing that's also interesting is the way that we're using the internet is also changing significantly in our private lives. It wasn't that long ago when search was really the number one or the dominant feature that people went to the internet for. But if you take a look at what's happening, the way that we want to consume content is changing. And we're increasingly looking to sites like YouTube for video, and Google's acquisition there shouldn't have come as a surprise. But also Facebook is very quickly growing in terms of the gravitational pull that it has for internet users. And so the way that we're thinking about the internet is also changing. But perhaps a statistic that's really important for India is the devices upon which information is now being consumed. And again, what this slide shows, and I don't want to sort of run through the Morgan Stanley report, but what it shows is that desktops, laptops, and smartphones, what the shipment forecasts are. And you can see now that increasingly everybody's using a smartphone, whether it's a BlackBerry or an iPhone or some other device. But the way that we're using these devices has changed significantly. It's almost, really almost astonishing that, I think Apple shipped 84 million units of the iPhone in the first 7 quarters. And one of the first statistics they brought to market was that people were using the iPhone less than 40% of the time to make a phone call. The rest of the time they were using it was to transact with content and data, to use applications and so on. And from Salesforce's perspective, we think this is massively exciting. We think that we've reprioritised our markets globally, and India is now, in fact, our fastest growing market worldwide, one of our top 10 markets worldwide in terms of prioritisation and importance. And we think it's because of this shift from what we're calling Cloud 1 to Cloud 2. And there are some interesting implications here in terms of what you want to do from a marketer. We think that the first generation was really about giving businesses applications that were relatively inexpensive, could be quickly deployed, and were easy to use. But the characteristics have now moved to collaboration, real-time information, and mobile. But equally, we're also starting to see that devices like the iPad and the iPhone and some of these other things are going to significantly change the way that not only consumers use information, but the way that businesses are able to use it as well. Because some of these devices have the benefit of being mobile aware, which changes the marketing implications. We look at feeds and push and everything else, and I think we need to be very much aware of this. And so I thought what I'd try and do is just sort of take my presentation on a tangent and talk about what the implications of this are in terms of the way that companies, not consumers, are thinking about the impact of these sort of driven demands or the Facebook imperative on networks. And I think this probably sort of breaks down Hari's professional network slide a little bit more. And so when I think about networks, I think about internal networks, really about employees. And the questions that need to be asked is, how does the rise of social media and social networking allow companies to make employees more productive, more collaborative? How does the companies become more competitive? But equally, is there an opportunity to attract and retain top-class talent? Now, in the area of external networks, it's obviously about customers and it's about partners. And the questions here are sort of slightly different, but no less advantageous. Because one of the things that we're starting to see, and I'll give you some examples of this, is that companies are increasingly turning to social networks to be able to tap new sources of innovation or to tap the wisdom of the crowds. They're looking at creating very much differentiated experiences. And equally, they're trying to identify new customer revenue channels. So let me just sort of quickly dive into each of these separately. This is how I begin my day. I don't know how you begin yours. But I come to work and there is just an ever-growing sea of information. There are people that I've got to try and connect with. There's all this content and documents inside my organisation. I'm trying to follow data from business applications. And trying to get on top of this is really difficult. And as I said, it's forever growing. And the consequences of not getting on top of it can often be pretty severe. And it can result in losing deals, creating angry customers, sending out the wrong information, or in fact losing customers. And so the question becomes, how do you get your employees inside a company to collaborate better in this environment? And I think that all too often the technologies that have been proposed have required us to connect the dots on the earlier slide. But the really interesting thing that's happened is that in our consumer lives, every day, 500 million people have found a better way to collaborate on Facebook. And I think that one of the interesting things about Facebook for me is I've probably got, maybe 360 or 400 followers or friends. And I dive into those, and it's amazing how many of those people I haven't spoken to in 20 years. I went to school with them, and suddenly somehow we've managed to reconnect. But the other thing that's equally amazing is I can tell you who's married, who's got kids, where they went on holidays, what they did yesterday, who's connecting with who, and so on. And that's because the insights are getting pushed to me. I'm not having to go in and try and connect the dots with all of these things. And so it's not surprising, therefore, that companies are really wrestling with the question of how do I embrace all the advantages of Facebook but deliver it to my employees in an environment that I have confidence in? How do I give them all of that functionality in an environment that's trusted, that's private, and it's secure? Because when you think about it, you don't need to recreate the paradigm. Everybody knows how to use Facebook. I'm sure if I asked people who had a Facebook account, most of the hands would go up. But the reality is why do we go to work every day and companies aren't embracing this technology? And so one of the things that Salesforce has been very focused on is really trying to bring Facebook to the enterprise. And a lot of it is about this construct that we have around what we call Cloud 2. And you can see here, and I'll give you a little bit of detail on this, but this is what our business applications now look like. And so the question that we were really asking ourselves 10 years ago, which was, why can't business applications be more like Amazon.com? The question we're asking now, and increasingly the question that a lot of enterprise software companies are asking now, is why can't enterprise software be more like Facebook? And as a marketer, so I run a team across the region, and as a marketer, this is the first window I open when I get into the office, and it's the last window I close before I leave. And the reason for that is that I collaborate in it every day. I use email very little these days. I'm actually inside this application. It allows me to connect with sales to close more deals. I can follow campaigns. I'm collaborating with dashboards. I'm able to share and get documents pushed to me personally. And it actually looks like Facebook. I mean, I'm not suggesting here's Facebook, but it actually looks like Facebook because it's such a familiar metaphor. And so you can see within my chatter interface, I've got my profile with my photo, a little bit about me, what I do. You can see, who I'm following, who's following me, recent files. But then you can also see some of the things that I'm working on. And so yesterday, I posted on my status, another day, another deck, finalising a presentation for an event in Bangalore on Thursday. And within minutes, somebody had immediately come back to me wanting a little bit more information. And if I was taking the latest feed, the shape of this deck has changed significantly over the last 24 hours based on the input that people had to it. The other thing you can also see is that I'm following other documents. So as people change their documents, I'm able to see that as well. It's a very, very powerful feature. And I think that one of the things that we talk to a lot of local customers about this, and this is one of certainly one of my favourites. This is Sumit Vaid, who's the founder of a very entrepreneurial financial management startup. And I need not go into a lot of detail about what they're doing, but the question he asks is very simple. Which is why there almost is no excuse for business not to be more productive, insightful, spontaneous, but most importantly, if they're able to bring consumer-led technologies into the enterprise, it has the potential to be a lot more fun. So the second thing I wanted to talk to you about was external networks and the way that we're thinking about leveraging a lot of this technology for that. This may be difficult to read up the back, but this is the way that I think diagrammatically about the way that Salesforce does marketing. We think about it, really much in sort of three constructs. So there's evangelism, which is everything from influencers and the analysts and the press and so on. There's engagement, which is sort of traditional marketing around events and demand gen and the like. But then an area where we're dialing down our investment a lot in our traditional marketing mix and dialing it up is in this area of communities. And the way that we think about communities is really in three tenets. So we've re-architected our website significantly over the last 2 years to promote a lot more blogs and ideas and knowledge and user groups and so on. But where the real effort has gone is around creating and owning our own social channels, be they on sites like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, but probably just as importantly, trying to participate in conversations that are happening on other channels. So participating in conversations on channels that we don't own. Now, one of the enormous benefits this has delivered to us in recent years is around this area of crowdsourcing. And so one of the unique characteristics of our technology model is that every single one of our 82,000 customers worldwide is using the current version. There is only one version of software of Salesforce in the market. And the result for that means that 100% of our R&D effort goes into the next version. We're not trying to maintain back versions. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to get very close to our users globally, no matter where they're based, no matter what their size, to try and tap innovation. Because as we release sort of 4 major releases every year with about 100 to 150 releases, we want the community to decide what's most demanded. And to do that, we have a website on our community called the Idea Exchange. And the Idea Exchange is where companies can just come, or customers can come, and they can propose an idea. And the idea is that it should become a light bulb moment for the global community.